Today I am going to continue teaching on everyday consciousness and primordial awareness by Trangu Rinpoche. I am going to begin on page 25. The title is Mind Consciousness. I've already talked about the 5 sense consciousnesses, and these 5 sense consciousnesses are thought-free. They do not generate thoughts. They cannot create thoughts. They just directly perceive objects. But it is the mind consciousness that is the thinker. This thinker can be quite busy. It generates all kinds of thoughts. Trangu Rinpoche, his translator, used the word entertains all kinds of thoughts. I think that word was chosen carefully. The mind consciousness does not have particular gates where information enters. Like the 5 sense consciousnesses, you have the sense organs. Mind consciousness is not like that. One reason is that mind consciousness has no definite location in the body. It's not associated with a particular location of the body. You can't say that it's in the brain, for instance. If there's no location, it can't have, you might say, a gateway into it. It is called the 6th consciousness because the first 5 are the 5 sense consciousnesses, and it's the next one. So 6 has no other significance than it's just the way that it is ordered. So we create many thoughts. If you've meditated at all, you have gotten an experience of that. When we're meditating, we become more aware of this than during our mundane daily life. We are constantly creating thoughts. So as meditators, we're already beginning to learn a little bit more about the mind consciousness. And we can have positive thoughts like loving kindness and compassion, patience, and so forth. And we can have negative ones. The basic ones, of course, are anger, desire, and indifference or ignorance. And to examine these a little deeper, our thoughts and our moods are interdependent. If we're in a good mood, we generally have positive thoughts. And if we're in a bad mood, we generally have negative thoughts. And it can work the other way around. If we have enough negative thoughts, pretty soon we're in a bad mood. So all of this thinking, these emotions and so forth, these are related to mind consciousness. Going back to last week's talk and an earlier part of the book, Trangu Rinpoche talked about there is a sense consciousness. Let's talk about the I consciousness. And then there is the I faculty, which is made out of light, which cannot be observed by most people. But the Buddha talked about this, and the highly realized siddhas talked about this. It has to do with the subtle body. And then there is the actual sense organ of the eye. So the sense consciousness arises when the sense faculty receives input from the sense organ. The eye receives something, a form, a color, movement, and so forth. It's then transmitted to the eye faculty, and then this eye consciousness arises. And it only arises if it's getting input from the eye faculty. So it is not constantly there. If there's nothing for the eye to see, the eye consciousness is not there. There's no input from it. That's maybe another way to put it. The mind consciousness, however, the way it receives input is from one or more of the sense consciousnesses, plus the mind consciousness. It can arise from a preceding moment of consciousness. If you observe your mind when you're meditating or when you're not meditating, you'll find you'll have a thought, and then that brings another thought, and then that's another thought. We call it a train of thoughts. And pretty soon we forget what the original thought was all about, and we're off who knows where. but we can be a long ways away from the original thought that started this train of thoughts. So the mind consciousness is always there. It does not have a sense faculty. It is just consciousness. And it's based on a preceding moment of consciousness, whether it be a sense consciousness or just another thought or emotion. Now, the realm of the mind consciousness is called the Dharma Dhatu, or the Cho Ying, which simply means the sphere of phenomena. The creations of mind consciousness are not actual forms, smells, sounds, and so forth. Our sense organs are the ones that pick these up. Our mind consciousness merely creates these. And this is why our visualizations aren't as clear as what we see when we look at a picture. This is why the mind consciousness apprehends all of the outer objects, but cannot perceive them clearly. The mind consciousness does not recognize clearly, does not see clearly, nor does it perceive the sense objects clearly. This is an important point. On the other hand, mind consciousness has the busiest job. And again, you've probably noticed that when you meditate. It's always busy, always busy. This is one of its extraordinary qualities, that the sense consciousnesses are only there when there is something for them to be aware of. And again, there are not thoughts about what sense consciousnesses are aware of. That's the mind consciousness's job. It is the mind consciousness that judges these perceptions with thoughts such as, this is good, this is bad, I don't like this, I like this, I want more of this. It is the mind consciousness that meditates. And for human beings, it's very important because human beings can meditate. I joke and say you can teach a dog to sit, but you can't teach them to meditate. And the five sense consciousnesses cannot meditate. Mind consciousness not only has the busiest job, but it is the most important part of traveling the path. When we understand this about the mind consciousness and the creations of mind consciousness being different from what the sense consciousnesses perceive, this helps us when we're meditating on a deity. We come to the understanding that during meditation, the deity visualization does not appear as clearly as it would if we were looking at a statue or looking at a painting of the deity. This is a self-created mental image. And the clarity of the visualization depends on our mental stability. If you can focus your mind on creating this object, you have it. And as soon as you become distracted, it's gone, because it's a creation of your mind. Whereas if you have a painting of the deity in front of you, as long as you have your eyes focused on it, it's right there. And if you close your eyes, it's gone. But as soon as you open them, there it is again. So this is very different from the way mind consciousness apprehends an object. Trungpa Rinpoche says that it's a mistake to think that you have to visualize as clearly with your mind consciousness as you do with your eye consciousness. The eye consciousness is thought-free. It perceives what is in sight, but it cannot visualize. So it is the mind consciousness. I'm going over this in great detail here, maybe a little repetitive, but it's the mind consciousness that is meditating, and there's no real external object. If you're holding the deity in front of you and then trying to do a visualization from that, you're really basing it on the eye consciousness more than your mental ability to create the deity. But it is good to have these visual help in trying to make the visualization as clear as possible. We want to be able to visualize the deity, all the different hand-held objects, the ornamentation, and so on and so forth. So we try to visualize, and we come up with hopefully some type of an image that is created by the mind. With an unstable mind, there's an unstable visualization. With a stable mind, there is a stable visualization. And of course, it's a continuum. To go back, speaking of stability, the five sense consciousnesses are considered to be unstable consciousnesses because they arise based on a sense object. The mind consciousness is stable because it's always there, even if you're asleep, even if you are knocked out with anesthesia. So when we're visualizing a deity, we are training our mind. We are developing mental stability by visualizing the deity, and when it's gone, coming back, recreating it, and trying to develop this one-pointed concentration. Doing shamatha meditation has the same effect when we come back to the breath, or practice open awareness. All of this is a type of meditation and a type of concentration. Stability can be measured by how long you can keep a self-created appearance. I'm not saying keep a stopwatch, but we have an idea of how long we can create and keep a visualization. The point is that this gives us an idea of practice being effective, or if we need to practice more. Beginners, of course, have a much more difficult time with a visualization of any kind. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said this: regardless of your visualization, the quality of it, how long it lasts before it disappears, what's most important is to have the sense of the presence of the deity. When you're creating this visualization, to have the sense that this deity is present here in the room with you. And in a lot of our practices, like green Tara and white Tara, the thousand-armed Chenrezi, there are places in there where we invoke the deity, and then the deity comes and absorbed into you, and you become the actual deity. You visualize yourself as a deity. You've got the invocation, and then the real deity comes and dissolves into the self-visualization that you created. What's important is to feel that you are the deity rather than this is somehow or another a fantasy. So if your visualization quickly vanishes when you get distracted, then just keep training more, doing more practice. And when you do it properly, your concentration will improve, your one-pointed concentration, and you'll be able to hold the visualization longer. Quote, whether the visualization of the deity in our meditation is clear or not depends solely on the stability of our mind. Next, he talks about the relationship of our sense consciousnesses and meditation. This just goes into a little more depth what I've talked about. With shamatha meditation or deity meditation, it involves our mental consciousness. The five sense consciousnesses can't meditate. They can't create anything. They don't create thoughts. They're not involved in thoughts. They don't distract a stable mind, with the emphasis on stable. As a result of that, we don't need to block any input from the five sense consciousnesses if we have a stable mind. We don't have to block input. We don't need to stop them. We can't. We just let them happen. They are mere appearance. And so we let the sense perception happen naturally by itself and let go of it. That can be very difficult to do for both beginners and even some intermediate practitioners. You hear a sound and your mind runs after it, so to speak. Mingyur Rinpoche taught this technique, you might say, is a step in between being totally distracted by the sound and being able to maintain one-pointed concentration and not be distracted by the sound. And what he taught was to meditate on the sound. If you're hearing a sound like a dog barking or conversations in another room, instead of following the breath, if you're doing shamatha meditation, and this is how he was referring to it with shamatha meditation, not deity meditation, but just let your awareness go to the sound. Don't think about it. Don't think about the contents of the words. Just experience the sound directly without commentary. And when the sound is gone, go back to following the breath. And that way you can actually utilize sound to help develop your concentration. To go into this in a little more detail, I attended a teaching that Khandro Rinpoche gave one time. And she said, you can go to a crowded beach and still have a good time. So the idea is don't get upset if there's sound that you feel shouldn't be happening or is distracting you. Use it rather than try to fight it or try to get away from it. Just use it. To continue here, when our mind consciousness meditates, we notice that the mind is moving. We've got past thoughts that come up. We've got future thoughts that come up. We have thoughts about the present that come up. And we can go from one to another to another. We can even think things like when we're meditating in a group, the person next to me is not moving at all. They must be a good meditator. I'm a terrible meditator. Or I'm a better meditator than the person next to me because I'm not moving and wiggling as much as they are, and on and on and on and on our mind goes. We bring up all kinds of suffering, of happiness, of various emotional habitual patterns. Sometimes this is called monkey mind. It's been likened to a soap opera. And if you pay attention to it, you'll find not only is it a soap opera, but it's reruns of the same old soap opera. And that's fine because you're noticing it. As your practice deepens, these gross thoughts lose their strength and don't come up so much. And there's more stability, and the mind is able to rest more within itself and can remain in this meditative concentration, this calm abiding. Again, it might be that something happens and you're back to monkey mind. I think a good way to describe it, I mentioned train of thoughts earlier. At first, the train is going pretty quickly, but then as you practice, the thoughts don't come so quickly, and you start noticing there's a little space between the cars and the train as the train slows down. When you find that there's a little more space between one thought and another, that shows that your practice is bearing fruit. Eventually, you start seeing more space than you see cars, or experience more space than you experience cars. Trungpa Rinpoche then addresses the question, if the mind is not having many thoughts, is this a state of stupidity? So I looked up, of course, what is stupidity described as in the dictionary. What I came up with was, quote, behavior that shows a lack of good sense or judgment. And obviously, if your mind is not filled up with a lot of thoughts, you're more likely to have good judgment and good sense, maybe even common sense. It's actually the opposite. If your mind isn't filled up with a lot of thoughts, you're not so distracted from whatever it is that you're doing. You can be more focused on what you are doing at the present time and less focused on a lot of thoughts that are about the past or the future. So the mind can relax a little bit, can see a little more clearly. The soap opera kind of slows down, and maybe even you're able to turn it off. I actually have said this before. If you're not too familiar with your soap opera, then keep a diary and write down not what the important thoughts were of the day, but your ordinary thoughts were for the day. You might also try writing down the important ones, because after 3 or 4 months, when you go reread it, you might find, those thoughts really weren't so important. Or why is every page a carbon copy or almost a carbon copy of the day before, of the day before and the day before? And it's actually very good to get to know how your mind operates. And instead of being embarrassed or getting down on yourself, realizing that, I'd like to have something a little better than this. I'd like to have some freedom. So if through practice we're able to decrease our senseless thinking, of course, meaningful thoughts have a chance to arise. This is why we meditate on calm abiding. I once read a book which was not in the Buddhist tradition, but it described basically the same thing this way. That is that our negative thoughts are like holding down a beach ball under the water, weighting it down. And if you let go of the negative thoughts, the beach ball immediately comes to the surface. You don't have to do anything to have the ball surface. It's in the nature of it. If we can tame our mind and quiet down this monkey mind and the negative thoughts and so forth, that things will go better, we will feel better. Our concentration, one-pointed concentration, will improve a little bit. Maybe it's not completely one-pointed, but it's more pointed than it was before. To kind of sum up this section, Trungpa Rinpoche says that all 6 of these consciousnesses, the mind consciousness and the 5 sense consciousnesses, are called apprehending consciousnesses because they apprehend objects. The 5 sense consciousnesses directly apprehend their respective objects, and the mind consciousness apprehends these 5 indirectly, and it allows thoughts to arise. So all of them, you might say, are input, and they apprehend. The mind consciousness, of course, is the most important. It's the root of attachment and aversion, happiness and suffering. And it's the most important consciousness in our daily life. Last Sunday, I talked about listening, contemplating, and meditating. And it is mind consciousness. Well, the ear consciousness hears. Mind consciousness takes what the ear consciousness hears and develops thoughts about what it hears. It is mind consciousness that contemplates, and it is mind consciousness that meditates. So it's very important to realize this about mind consciousness. The contemplating and the meditating is done by mind consciousness. It's a very crucial link in the sensory input of hearing the teachings. He says that these 6, and he uses the word collections of consciousness, they constitute 2 different categories with different characteristics, and he already has talked about this in the book. This is, in a way, a review. The 5 sense consciousnesses clearly perceive and have direct contact with sensory objects. Then the mind consciousness perceives its own created images, its own created thoughts, and it perceives what input it gets from the 5 sense consciousnesses. And as a result, they are vague, wavering, or unclear. And this is not just referring to the eye consciousness. It has to do with all 5 sense consciousnesses. I remember I was in Taiwan and I went to a traditional Taiwan tea ceremony. And it surprised me because I had been to a Japanese tea ceremony. A traditional Chinese tea ceremony is nothing like a Japanese tea ceremony. It was a tea tasting ceremony where the man would brew a very small amount of tea and pour you a few sips in a cup. Then we would all taste it. And then he would describe the flavor, the aroma, the whatever. I guess it would be almost like a wine tasting party. And when you think about it, how can you put into words what a taste is? Well, it tastes like this, or it tastes like that. He was surprised, on the other hand. He brought out this very old tea. I don't know, it could have been 40, 50 years old. And he asked, well, what does it taste like? And I said, it tastes like a walk in the woods in the fall, because of the dry leaves on the path. That's what it tasted like. But that's just saying this is what it tasted like. I couldn't say this is the taste. So our mind consciousness has this lack of clarity. It's wavering, it's vague. The sense consciousnesses can only perceive the present moment. They have to perceive the present moment. They can't perceive the past or the future. Mind consciousness can think about all of them like that. Now it's in the present, just entered the past, and pretty soon it's off into the future. He finishes this up with a long quote that refers to how different consciousnesses are referred to classically. So I'm going to read the whole quote. The five sense consciousnesses are like a mute with good eyes. They perceive clearly, but are unable to express themselves or to talk about what something actually looks like or what indeed it is that they perceive. The thoughts are like a blind person who is a gifted speaker. This refers to the mind consciousness, which, although it only perceives the objects in a vague and unclear way, talks a lot about them, commenting with its many thoughts on the vaguely perceived objects like a well-gifted speaker. I couldn't resist that quote. We're on chapter 2 now. The stable consciousnesses on page 31. And I'll go into this a little bit. I probably will not complete it. The five sense consciousnesses and the mind consciousness are not stable because they arise and then they vanish, only to arise again and again and again. He uses the example of thunder, bringing up the ear consciousness. The thoughts come and go. Emotions come and go. There is a lot of instability. Now, there are stable consciousnesses, and these are present constantly. They function continuously. They never cease, even in sleep. And this essence of mind retains memories clearly. It never dissolves. He uses the word, the clear essence of mind. There are two kinds of stable consciousnesses. They are klesha mind. It's translated as the mind endowed with afflictions, and the all-base consciousness. After that introduction goes into explaining klesha mind. Interestingly enough, he then right off the bat says that this does not mean the mental afflictions of desirous attachment, anger, dullness, and so forth. What this really means is the mind that is holding on to a self, holding on to a personal self, and holding on to the self of phenomena. And klesha mind is what keeps reminding us of I am. This is all about me. Reminds me of Leibniz, a Western philosopher, who said, I think, therefore I am. And that's this klesha mind. Sometimes this conception of I is very gross. Sometimes it's very subtle. But if it's very gross, that probably is related to the sixth consciousness rather than the klesha consciousness. Because the klesha conscious mind is not very clear. It's constant, it's continuously holding on, thinking about an I. It's like background music that you're not paying a lot of attention to. Let's say you're at the grocery store, or I was just at the dentist and they had background music. It's that kind of thing. It's there, but you're not usually that aware of it being there. And he says that these are rigid and inflexible thoughts of self-cherishing, and they arise involuntarily. It's not this logical, but it's a bit like, what does this have to do with me? And it always comes up with an answer of what it has to do with me. One kind or another, it has to do with me this way. It's important because of that way. And this klesha mind is always accompanied by what are called subtle mental events. I'm going to get into those next week. But this klesha mind is thinking I, and it's usually unnoticed. Then secondly, it is I am important. And then this also means that there's an element of ignorance there and haziness and vagueness because the I is not realized to be false. Then on top of that, it is permeated with a subtle pride that he says it's the thought, quote, I am better than others. And that these four elements are really the core or the foundation of klesha mind, that they're always there. This mind endowed with afflictions. Through that, we develop grasping at a self. It gets stronger and stronger. So we have these four mental events: conception of an I, attachment to the I, ignorance, and pride.